Hello and welcome back to Podcasts Like a Pro. In this video, we're going to talk through all the directories you need to submit your podcast to get the most listeners for your new show. Let's dive in. The first thing to remember is that it's super important to put your podcast in front of where your listeners are already consuming podcast episodes. Think about this in terms of like barriers to entry. Don't introduce another barrier or another reason that someone won't listen to your podcast. So think about where your audience is already consuming other podcasts that they listen to and get your podcast on that platform. Okay, here we have the top 10 places to submit your podcast to get the most listeners for your new show. And the first may seem obvious, but it's the king. Apple Podcast is the kind of original platform for people to submit podcasts to, and even today is still by far the top listening source for most podcasts. We have a complete walkthrough of submitting your podcast to Apple Podcasts, and check out the link below to follow that guide. The next one is Spotify. Spotify is kind of the new kid on the block when it comes to really popular podcasting directories, but especially outside of the US and in younger demographics, Spotify is the listening directory that people are tuning into podcasts for. Spotify recently made waves with the announcement of acquiring the Joe Rogan Show, and you can watch out for Spotify to make a lot of advances in the podcasting space, maybe even becoming the number one listening source here in the future. The next one is catering to the Android market specifically and using Google Podcasts. Google has kind of missed the ball in terms of getting a unified single platform for folks to listen to podcasts on, but they've recently rolled the old Google Play podcasts into the Google Podcast platform, and here is a really great way for folks on Android devices to tune into podcasts. We'll have a link on how to submit your show to Google Podcasts in the notes below this video. Check it out. Stitcher has been around for a while and still remains a really popular cross-platform directory to submit your podcast to. So folks on Android and Apple devices can listen in on Stitcher, and is definitely worth submitting your show to. Just takes a couple minutes. The rise of smart speakers is one of the biggest growth engines in podcasting. People listening to their podcasts at home, in their bedroom, while cooking dinner is a really popular way for families and couples and multiple people to consume podcasts together. TuneIn is the directory to submit your podcast to make sure that it's available on smart speakers in people's houses. So we've covered a lot of the main directories that people submit their podcasts to, but now we'll cover the third-party mobile apps that you want to make sure your podcast is available from. A lot of these will scrape or draw your podcast directly from Apple Podcasts, so you don't have to do anything specific there, but it's worth double-checking that your podcast is available in these mobile app platforms. The first is Overcast, only available for iOS, but is arguably the best and most feature-rich third-party mobile app out there. This is where I listen to my podcasts, and it's a fantastic platform. Just want to make sure that your podcast is available here. It does pull directly from Apple Podcasts, so a day or so after you've submitted your podcast and it's been approved by Apple Podcasts, check it out on Overcast. Make sure you're able to subscribe directly there by searching, and you'll be set. Pocketcasts is another popular third-party app that's available both for iOS and Android, but is a really popular listening source for Android users. It also pulls from Apple Podcasts, so a couple days after your show has been approved by Apple, make sure that Pocketcasts is showing your podcast when you search for it there, and that people that are already using Pocketcasts to listen to other shows can subscribe. These next two may seem as a surprise to some of you, but iHeartRadio and the next one is Pandora are really popular listening sources for folks wanting to tune into your show online. These are more platform plays, kind of like Apple Podcasts and Stitcher, but for some demographics and some shows and some types of listeners, this is a really great way to expand the reach of your show. It just takes a minute to submit your feed there in iHeartRadio, and similarly Pandora will process your feed in just a couple of days, and your show will be live there. This kind of falls under the bucket of it just takes a couple of minutes. You only have to do it once, and then every time you publish a new episode to your feed, your podcast shows up in all of these directories. So it's worth a little bit of extra time to submit your podcast to these extra directories, even if you think it won't really move your listenership a little bit. Even if it does just that one more listener that then tells their friends about it, it's a win for you and worth your time. So just remember here, the key is to put your podcast in the places where folks are already listening to shows. Don't make them go listen to just your podcast on one other type of listening platform or one other mobile app. Put your podcast where they're already consuming their other shows, and you'll increase your listenership on autopilot.